Hey, magical experimenters, Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to the latest live stream. So, I was asked a question a little while back um, about what the most difficult part or what the hardest part of magical work is. Like, what do I find that to be? And I thought it was an interesting question to be asked. So, I decided to do a video about it. And I would tell you that the hardest part of magical work for me has really been the internal work that occurs with magic. And so, what do I mean by internal work? Well, when I'm talking about internal work, I'm talking about the work you do on yourself. All those icky parts of you that need to be worked through, the blockages, the internal tension, the things that you might not like about yourself, your emotions, things like that. That's the hardest part of the work. It's not, I've never found like practical magic to be that hard. You define a result, you do the work and you get the result, or you don't get the result. You go back to the drawing board and figure out what's going on. But when it comes to and I've never found working with spirits to be that hard either. But when it comes to doing internal work, I find that that is really the hardest thing, and it's interesting because really internal work shows up in like the practical magic and the spirit work, all that to some degree or another. You might say, "Well, what do you mean by that, Taylor? Like, how does it show up there?" And my answer to that would really be that when you're doing internal work, you are essentially, or when you're doing magical work, you are essentially doing magic to affect change in the world around you. But the other part of the equation that's often left out and really shouldn't be is that you're also doing that magic to affect change within you, to change who you are. Because think about it this way, like you want a result, okay? I want this specific result. I want this specific thing to show up in my life. Okay, great. You want that. But what are you doing to make yourself ready for that, to make yourself worthy of that, to make yourself accept that? If you're not doing that, it can be really, you can get some interesting things where you can get the result for a short time and then have it like go right out of your life because you weren't ready for it or it wasn't something that you really wanted or whatever else. And this is what I mean by that internal work because it's like, okay, I've defined this result that I want, and I go and I do this work, and I get the result, but there's some part of me that's resistant to it, that's rebelling against it. Well, then what ends up happening? That result goes out of your life. If you've never had that happen, well, trust me, at some point you probably will. I have had it happen, and so it's one of those things where like my biggest takeaway has been, well, I need to do the internal work first before I do the practical magic. I need to make sure that that if I really want this thing, that I've really thought it through and that it is something I really want, and that I'm prepared to handle the consequences for getting that thing that I want, or whatever. And it's the same thing like with working with the spirit. If I'm choosing to work with a spirit, I'm necessarily inviting that spirit into my life. There's going to be some type of change that occurs internally as well as to the world around me. And so I have to be prepared for that change. I have to make sure that that really is something that I'm in alignment with, and if I'm not, then I need to do the necessary internal work. And that's why I find internal work to be hard, because it's really demanding that you know yourself and that you're aware of yourself in a way that simply is not going to be found a lot of times. I mean, unfortunately, the truth of the matter is, you look at most of the books on magic out there, and what you end up seeing is a lot of recipe books and things like that, where people are like, "Okay, I want to manifest this result," but what they don't tell you is, "Oh, and by the way, you might need to do some internal work around that. You might need to really dot your I's and cross your T's and make sure that this is really in alignment with who and what you are." And that it's something that you want to manifest. But there's another aspect to this. I mean, there's that aspect of the internal work, but there's another aspect, and I think that this is really what's worth noting, and it's this. Like even if you're not doing magic for a specific reason to get like a result, if you're just, you're living your life, you're inevitably going to encounter moments where you come across things about yourself that you don't like or care for, or where you come up on situations where you kind of look back in hindsight and you're like, if I had done this just a little bit differently, or if I had known myself better in this way, it would have gone down so much differently. And if you've had those moments, then you know what that's like. And it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to do that work and I'll figure that out. And next time it won't happen. And that's great. Well, if we choose to take a proactive approach, what we're really doing is we're choosing to do the internal work as much as possible ahead of time. So we're doing meditation, for example, to do dissolving work and dissolve the internal blockages and emotions. We're looking at our childhood wounds and traumas and whatever else, and we're working through them. We're recognizing how a lot of our behavior is conditioned and programmed a certain way, whether it's by family or culture or society or whatever else. And what we're doing is we're choosing to actively work on that proactively. Well, you normally don't come to that kind of proactive realization early on in your life. You really only come to it when you've lived life long enough where you're kind of like, I'm tired of bumbling along and being a bull in a china shop. I mean, that was the realization I had. And I had it back in 2004, where I mean, I was living my life by reaction a lot of the time, most of the time. And I realized I was like, I don't want to live my life by reaction. I don't want to wait for things to happen to me. I want to actually be proactive. And that's when I started to engage in a dedicated focus of internal work. In my case, it was the choice to create what I call an elemental balancing ritual and work with an elemental energy to balance my life out. But it also involves some Taoist meditation and other forms of internal work that were really just designed to kind of go in and start pulling apart the things that don't work and are otherwise creating issues. Let me be very clear. I absolutely am glad I've done that work. I think that over the years, it has helped me become a much more sane person, a much more content person, not always a happier person. I don't conflate happiness with contentedness. I think you can be content and not necessarily always feel happy. And like in the US at least, there's so much of an emphasis on being happy. Like, are you happy? Are you joy, are you feeling full of joy or things like that? Well, you know what? I'm not always happy. I don't know anyone who's always happy, but I am content. And that's kind of the key thing. Like if I am content, I can be content without necessarily being happy. Now I might need to figure out like why I'm not happy and what it is that I need to address or deal with. But there's a very real difference there. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's an important tangent. But the other thing that I want to talk about here is really just itchy nose there. The other thing I want to kind of comment on and really note is just like, when you're doing internal work, you're being you're being proactive with your life. What you're doing is you're recognizing like, look, my life is messy and I want to make it less of a mess. Now, I'm going to tell you this straight out. Like, doing the choice to do internal work will not automatically make your life less messy. Sometimes it'll make it messier before it makes it better. I mean, I had a period of time where I was doing this internal work, and it was definitely helping me work through stuff, but it was also making my life messier. Like when I did my elemental work with love and the elemental work with emptiness, those were some messy years. It was worth it. In the end, I came out better for it, but it wasn't easy work. And even now I can tell you that as well ordered as my life is, I still on occasion make messes. I'm still can be a messy person. I don't know anyone, no matter how much internal work they do, I don't know anyone who's got their life all together all the time. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we live in an environment where we don't have control over everything. Unless you have absolute control over everything around you and you can anticipate everything, life's going to happen and stuff's going to happen, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And you're going to have to recognize like, okay, here's the stuff that I don't like about me that I need to work through or change, or here's the stuff that I need to address. And these are all normal things that everyone goes through. It's just that if you're willing to do internal work, you have less of that. It doesn't automatically make it all go away, but you have less of it. And it's one of the reasons why I recommend doing internal work, because it makes a significant difference in your life. It doesn't automatically make your life perfect. It doesn't automatically make everything smooth. It just makes it a lot smoother once you get through the mess. But it's still in my experience the most difficult aspect of magical work, because Internal work calls on you to be honest with yourself. It calls on you to be truthful with yourself. If with nobody else, you have to be honest with yourself at the very least. I mean, hopefully you're honest and truthful with the people that are important to you in your life. I advocate for that very strongly. You have to be honest with yourself, and that's what internal work calls on. And that's why it's so difficult because you can't hide from who you are. I mean, I still will do it every day for the rest of my life. I mean, I actively engage in some form of internal work each day, and it's worth it because of how it has overall smoothed out my life and made things better. But I can also acknowledge that doing internal work is hard. It is the most difficult part. It's easy to manifest a result for something that you want. It's easy to go and work with a spirit. I'm not saying that there aren't some difficulties there, but really, in the grand scheme of things, it's a lot easier to do that work than it is to do internal work. Because with internal work, you really are facing who and what you are. And you're facing those aspects of yourself that you might not like, but that need to be worked with and embraced. And I put that word embrace in there purposely because I mean there are going to be times you're going to be like, I don't like this part of myself. I mean, I can say that easily because there have definitely been times where I have not liked who I am. And you have to remember to show compassion to yourself. I'm still figuring this out. Thankfully, I have a very patient partner who's helping me with that. But sometimes it's sometimes I am so hard on myself, and it's not a good thing necessarily. But I'm learning, and that's the thing about internal work. I mean, it's lifelong work. People sometimes want things to just be done like that. Well, like you do magic to get a practical result. Well, boom, it's done. But internal work is lifelong work. It's work that you're committing to every day. It's work that you're doing for the long term. It's not something that's just going to end overnight. It's something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life because you don't live like you said earlier, you don't live in an environment where you control everything and you can anticipate everything. Stuff's going to come up. You're going to have realizations. And so you just have to be honest with yourself and do the work and be compassionate with yourself at the same time. Like it's all too easy to be hard on yourself and think, "Oh, well, I'm doing the work." But that's not the case always. I mean, being hard on yourself isn't necessarily doing the internal work. It's just punishing yourself. Doing the internal work is being able to hold space with yourself, being present, being honest, doing the work and unpacking stuff, and at the same time being compassionate with yourself. And hopefully being more compassionate with other people as well, because you recognize like you see how fallible you are. I mean, I think the one thing that I have learned over the years more than anything is what a fallible human being I am. I and I it has helped me be less judgmental. I'm still not completely solved cured of the judgmental stuff, by the way. I can sometimes be very judgmental, but less so than I used to be when I was younger. And I think it's just because you do the work and you start to recognize, well, you know, who am I? How am I any better than this other person? And it doesn't mean you condone what the other person's done or anything like that, but it's just like you kind of look at it from a place of, well, I make mistakes too. But internal work helps you to smooth that stuff out and helps you to hopefully live a better life, and you have less of that kind of stuff come up and your life becomes easier and easier. I mean, I would say that for me, I still have the occasional snarl in my life, but overall my life is a lot easier and simpler because I've been willing to do the internal work and I've deprogrammed the stuff that otherwise would be coming up. And so I recommend doing that. It could be through meditation, it could be through some other course of action, but it's work that will transform and improve your life, and it's worth doing. So, thanks for watching and have a great evening.